Welcome to Bible Fiber. We are taking a break today from our Ezekiel deep dive to catch another archaeologist before he sets off for a summer expedition in Israel. Today's guest is Chris McKinny. Chris has his PhD from Bar Ilan University in Israel. His dissertation focused on the historical geography and archaeology of the town list of Judah and Benjamin in the book of Joshua. If you've never met a biblical geography junkie, you are in luck because you are going to today. Chris currently serves as an adjunct faculty member at several universities. I had the privilege of taking a class with Chris on the peoples of the Bible 2 years ago. He is also a senior staff member on the Tel Burna Archaeological Project, which is why he is heading to Israel soon, and he is the host of a great podcast called Biblical World, part of a series with OnScript. Check out his recent episode on the Gilgamesh Epic. A couple of years ago, I had a great time in Israel with Chris and the rest of his team at Gesher Media filming an upcoming feature film called Quest for the Throne of God, which I want an update on as well. Welcome to Bible Fiber, Dr. McKinney.
Shelley, it's so great to see you, and I look back on our time not only in Israel, but especially that course, which was one of my favorite courses to prepare for and teach with great joy. It's always fun to get into the nerdy details and discover more about the biblical world. And it's so great to see you succeeding and excelling on Bible Fiber, and great to be on here. So great to catch up.
Thank you. I did my first paper reading at the Evangelical Theological Society conference, and it was like a moment that I felt for the first time, am I an academic? Is this what it looks like?
It is. Reading papers, writing papers, that's being a scholar. That's being a real academic.
Of course, I turned the whole thing into a big social hour, so I'll bring my own flair to it. But for the listener, can you tell us how a boy from Corpus Christi, Texas, decided to move to Israel and study archaeology?
Yeah, so I always start with this idea of being an addict connected with biblical archaeology, and for me, that addiction started young. I always had a keen interest on studying history. You know, I grew up, in South Texas, and my granddad, who's also my pastor still, was a farmer, cotton and grain sorghum, and I'd spend countless hours on the combine or the cotton picker, and he'd tell stories about World War II and World War I and all the things he loved about history, and also a lot of the church theology and things along those lines. Well, he, as well as my grandmother, managed to get myself over to Israel when I was, I think, 13 years old, right at the time of bar mitzvah if I was Jewish, and it was a absolutely incredible experience. The trip itself, in hindsight, was just a crummy church tour, where I learned a lot of things that weren't exactly true, and the focus was on shopping sometimes, and I didn't go to all the places that I would later go. But it lit a fire for me, because it was at the same time I was reading all kinds of historical fiction about the founding of the State of Israel, about World War II. In fact, some of your readers may be interested, maybe some of them have read them before, the Bodie and Brock Taney series on, I think it's called the Zion Covenant, the Zion Chronicles, and there's a few other series that they did. I remember reading that as a young teenager and just being really enamored in that world. And so I don't have it still somewhere, but I wrote on my freshman paper, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, biblical archaeologist. And so that's why I went to Master's College in Southern California, because they had an extension campus that I knew of in Israel, the IBEX program. Went there with my wife, got married along the way, and decided as soon as I finished, I had to go back. So I went to Jerusalem University College for a graduate degree, did my first dig, and said, well, I love this. This is where I really want to be. And did my PhD in Israel, and then it just kept coming back year after year after year to explore more of the biblical world. It's very addictive. It's very exciting to be able to touch the real world of the Bible. And for me, I put it this way, that on the one hand, I feel like as a soft scientist, which is what archaeology and biblical archaeology is, especially, it's a soft science. You have this objective reality, being able to touch the world. But I'm also deeply influenced and love myth and story. And I remain just enamored with the biblical story and feel that there's this enchantment that you can find by continuing to go back to the story. And so it's these two things that I try to hold together. This, objective, things that we can touch and feel in archaeology and rediscover that world, but also try to see ourselves as part of this story, especially as a believer, as someone who sees themselves as, this line of priests, this royal priesthood Peter talks about, these people who are part of, Israel's ongoing story of redemption.
As a biblical geographer, what gets your motor going most about identifying the places of the Bible? Are you an Old Testament guy? Are you a New Testament? Do you dabble in both?
Yeah, historical geography is one of these disciplines that follows a certain set of rules. It follows three main types of categories. It has physical geography, that is unchanging. That's what it is, unless there's a volcanic eruption or massive change over time. But that wouldn't usually happen in history. It happens in the remote past. Then it has philology, which is essentially encompassing of all of the languages and language studies, but also the written texts for a historical geographer. That includes especially the Hebrew Bible and presumably the New Testament, but also the continued text that go with that. So that would include Josephus and the Onomasticon of Eusebius, all the way down to, Arab histories that were written because they're happening in the same place and time. And then the third is something called toponymy, specifically Arabic toponymy, where what happens is there's this phenomenon that happens throughout the Middle East, where the names are preserved up to something like 30%, and maybe even more than that. In fact, that's one of the things I'm interested in pursuing even further, from the most ancient times up until the present. So a good example of this is a site like let's say Tel Dan. Tel Dan in the north. Dan in Hebrew means Hebrew. Dan in Hebrew means judge, but its name is called Tel El Qadi, which in Arabic means judge. And then right beside the spring of Dan, you have Me Ladan, which preserves the ancient name. And so it doesn't happen every time, but a lot of times, and this is to me the key identification piece, is the Arabic name is often the thing that preserves it. And then philology gives you the way to track how that name was transpired over that period of time. And then the geography, make sure you're in the right zip code. And so you ask me, Hebrew Bible or New Testament, my focus is definitely on the Hebrew Bible. However, I am exceedingly and increasingly much more interested in not just the world of the New Testament, which has considerably less geographical names, but especially the intertestamental period, the books of First and Second Maccabees, and of course Josephus, which give us this wider perspective. So I'd say it's definitely within my purview, but the Hebrew Bible, of course, is the heart and soul of historical geography.
So switching gears to the Tel Burna excavation project, tell us, what is the Tel Burna site? Is it important to Bible readers? Have we even heard of it?
Yeah, Tel Burna is a tell, which is an ancient mound of settlement. That's what the Arabic name means. It's an Arabic and Hebrew word, actually a very ancient word that we can trace back to Akkadian. Even people living in the remote past called ancient cities on mounds tells. It even appears in the book of Joshua, Joshua 11. It says Joshua did not destroy any of the cities that set on tells. So it's something that's distinctive. It's usually caused by large fortifications in the Bronze Age. and then develop over time. So it's a common name that we find throughout the worlds of the Bible. Tel Burna itself is most likely the place of biblical Libna. Libna is mentioned in the Bible in a number of passages, many of them happening in the book of Joshua, where it is one of the towns that Joshua conquers in his so-called southern campaign in Joshua chapter 10. It's also a Levitical town. We're not exactly sure what Levitical towns mean or when they date to, but whatever it is, it's a Levitical town. We know that. And it's also a town that goes with the kingdom of Judah. Joshua 15 is probably dated to the time of the divided kingdom. In my dissertation, I argue that it's fairly early. It's happening probably in the 10th or the 9th century because it's this big, big, long list, probably an update to the book of Joshua. And we also find it appearing quite regularly in both the book of Kings and Isaiah. The most famous reference to Libna happens in the days of Isaiah when Sennacherib, king of Assyria, is going up against the whole kingdom of Judah because Hezekiah had led a rebellion against him. And most scholars and maybe some of your audience might remember that Jerusalem doesn't fall, that it's saved. And they might also, if they dig it a little bit deeper, they might know of Lachish and the great siege reliefs that Sennacherib bragged about in his palace in Nineveh, which are beautiful. And if you want to visit them, you have to go to the British Museum. But they might not know that after Sennacherib came to Lachish, he made the 5-mile journey to the north and surrounded the city of Libna. And this is the very last city that Sennacherib was campaigning against in 701 BC. And our excavations of the site have shown that the site was captured. It was one of the sites that he destroyed. I've even made the suggestion, although not in print, so you're getting an exclusive here, that do wonder if even the events that we read in the Bible about the angel of the Lord attacking Sennacherib, I wonder if that happened in the fields near Libna as opposed to Jerusalem. Most people think it happened in Jerusalem because that's good for the story. But if you just read the text, it seems like Sennacherib never came to Jerusalem. So in any case, the archaeology of the site shows that it was an important site in 701 BC. It was attacked and probably destroyed. It was built right after that. And this is one of the most important identification markers, is that in the 7th century, during the time of Josiah, Josiah was king from 639 to 609 BC. Josiah has a couple of wives. One of them is named Hamutal, who is from none other than Libna. She became the last queen mother of the kingdom of Judah before it fell to the Babylonians. And so because we have all of these periods, late Bronze Age, which we could potentially connect with Joshua, because we have 9th and 8th and 7th century remains, this seems to fit the pattern of the biblical site of Libna. And my other research connected with historical geography, I've also seemed to have uncovered a name nearby called Wadi Abu Laban. Laban, Libna, means white in both Arabic and Hebrew. So we think we have a very strong case that the site is biblical Libna. But more than that, I would say we have, and it's been my distinct privilege to be able to excavate there for the last, 12, 14, 15 years. It's the last season coming up. We've been able to put Libna, Tel Burna, on the map as a critical biblical town. This is not Jerusalem. This is not Lachish. But it is, I would say, a site that so characterizes the towns of Judah. And so in Ezekiel, right, you're doing through Ezekiel or Jeremiah, when they talk about the towns of the Shephelah or the towns of the Negev, this is the type of town that it's referring to. It's a relatively small site, something like 75 meters by 75 meters, square. It's got agricultural fields that surround it. It's got wine presses. It's got olive presses. It has a stream running near it, near the Nahal Gavrin. It's a site that experienced all of the ups and downs of what life was like. It was attacked by Shishak. It was attacked by probably Hazael in 830 BC. It was attacked by Sennacherib in 701. It was attacked by Nebuchadnezzar. And so for 400 years or so, we get a real glimpse of a site that was part of the kingdom of Judah, not the main player, but a site that, if you want to imagine what it was like to live as a Judahite, you can get it there. And that's been just an amazing experience to find. And of course, the best part about archaeology, as I learned in grad school, is the people, and not the ones that you dig up that are dead, but the people that you get to do it with. And so they become really family, and I'm really looking forward to spending some time with them in this last season.
This is the last season for Tel Burna, and this is your 12th season?
So we started it is the last season. We started in 2009 with a survey season. And so I'm trying to remember, this might be the 14th or 15th season. I haven't done the math. The math gets tricky because we do dig every year, but there was that COVID year. And there was one year it was Israel only. So I think this is the 15th season, if I'm not mistaken. Itzik Shai, the director, can correct me if I'm wrong. But I think we're in our 15th season. And of course, the project is not over. In many ways, the project has just begun, because the next step in the process is to produce the final publications, which are very much in the works. And we've had a whole host of preliminary publications and studies that can be found on our website, telburna.wordpress.com. And you can also follow my academia page, or Itzik Shai's academia page. A couple of years ago, we were joined by Steve Ortiz from Lipscomb University and his students, and they're going to be with us in the field again this summer. And he's one of the directors as well. And so we're not only excited about the final season and publishing, but we also, and especially me, are looking to see, what the next one on the horizon. And so one of the goals this season is to do some initial investigation about what potentially could be next.
So one of the goals of Bible Fiber is always to connect the story of ancient Israel with modern Israel, which is why I wanted to interview you before you left for this dig, because the elephant in the room is that Israel is at war, and you are going to dig during another season of war, which I know that you dug during the Second Intifada. But how is the war impacting your plans? Did it threaten to cancel the dig? And are there any precautions you're making?
Yeah, there's no question that the, ongoing war, post October 7th, and, this horrific attack and ongoing issues, and we could say it's been a lot of time on, has impacted us. And it's impacted a lot of excavations. A number of archaeological projects in Israel have decided to not have a 2024 season. We've decided to move ahead. For one, it is our last season. We are not planning on expanding. We're planning on targeted excavations. We're focusing entirely on the late Bronze Age. That's where all our energy is going to be focused, to know more about it. And we clearly have a destruction, that's interesting, into the 13th century. So we're trying to expand, know the building better, answer our very final questions. So, maybe if we were in a situation where we wanted to have a very large team, we would have reconsidered, but it fit fine with what we were trying to do. But I also think in terms of safety, Israel is a modern country. It still has the Iron Dome. I don't really think there's actually any difference between being there now in terms of safety. Of course, there's psychological differences. Of course, you're going to see on the Israeli side huge protests and things along those lines that are all about what's going on, because it is of utmost significance. And actually, as someone who spent so much time in Israel, I almost feel guilty not being there, and was wanting to go and, be with my friends who have kids in the army and just, support. But I'd say it has impacted the excavation. The biggest impact is probably not safety, but, figuring out airfare. Airfare is really weird, getting there. We're getting maybe skinning ahead of ourselves, but we're planning on, going for a filming next week, and just the airfare is just all over the place. So that's been a thing to consider. So as far as I can tell, though, there's really no safety difference between now, where we are months after October 7th, 6 months or so, whatever it is, and where we would have been, last summer to go to the dig. I mean, everything is still in its place. If anything, there's just a heightened security in a lot of the places, and we're not planning on being anywhere close to the Gaza envelope.
How far are you from Jerusalem? How far is Tel Burna from Jerusalem? Like, put it in place. So, as our geographer, put us in the place.
Yeah. So if you were to fly a drone, which some of those were flown recently, from the Temple Mount, and some of those were flown over the Temple Mount recently, to Gaza, we would basically be right in the middle. So we're about 35 miles southwest of Jerusalem, and we're about 25, 30 miles to the northeast of Gaza. We're closer to Ashkelon than we are Gaza. We're very close, if your readers or your listeners know, close to Beit Guvrin, fairly close to Lachish and Beit Shemesh. We're in the region of the Shfela, very close to the hometown of Micah the prophet, who, for whatever reason, didn't mention us. We don't hold it against him. But he witnessed, this Sennacherib destruction. That's where we are in the Guvrin Valley of the Shfela. So
is there some sort of protection if there's rockets? It would be within range of rockets, or no?
Oh, for sure. I mean, in some sense, everything is in range.
Sure.
I think that I didn't have the experience of doing it, but I think it was the one in 2014. The iron, I forget the name of I think it was the Operation the Cloud, or I forget the name, but that started the day of the end of our excavation. But the Tel Asafi excavation was the next week. And so the entire project, because rockets were constantly flying overhead and being captured by the Iron Dome, they would jump into the squares. So that's the protocol, is if you do have sirens, or if you do have, any sound of head, you jump into essentially the dugout, right? That's a foxhole, that you've been digging. But that's the protocol. It's extremely unlikely that, you have any attack. And there's, of course, rocket attacks are far, far less, but they're not exactly targeting Libna. Not that
they're not exactly accurate.
Exactly. Not that they have any say as to where it goes. So yeah, as I said, I think 2024, that could have happened in any year before. So I don't see any real, if anything, the chances are a bit less, because there's ongoing activity to try to root out all of the rockets.
Someone definitely needs to write an article about that. You don't need bomb shelters when you have squares, when you have dig squares. That is your shelter. That is super interesting. Well, can you just give us, people love treasure. What is the best thing that your team's ever found at Tel Burna?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say the way I always try to answer this question is to think about the context. Oh, let's just consider an inscription, okay, that you'd find at an antiquities dealer in the old city or something like that, and it's purchased. Immediately what's going to happen is, oh, this is great. We found this thing. And it mentions, a biblical character or something. And then immediately scholars say, well, it's probably a forgery. And they have back and forth. A good example of this is the James, the brother of Jesus ossuary, or the pomegranate, or all these other, likely forgeries, especially the Jehoash inscription. So those are treasure. Those are a cool find if they're real. But even if they could be proven to be authentic, they don't have a context, right? They don't have anything that allows you to be able to demonstrate that it's real, for one. But even besides veracity, you don't know where it was found. So, if a stele, let's say the Tel Dan stele, the Tel Dan stele in Dan is so incredibly important, not only for what it says about David being a dynastic person 130 or so after David probably died, and he's still being considered to be the key figure for the kingdom of Judah. It appears as the house of David, as opposed to the kingdom of Judah. It's used synonymously, but the fact that it was found at the gate of Dan in secondary use, meaning this was set up as a stele by an Aramean king, probably Hazael, and then it was destroyed. So we have a whole story, we have a whole context, it's secure. So to me, the greatest find that we've had is not necessarily a particular object, but it is a building. Archaeologists will always say it's the buildings. We want architecture. Architecture is the key. And so for me, I was lucky. My very first season, this is back in 2011, so almost 15 years ago now, we opened up a couple squares, 5 by 5 meters, hoping to see if this area was, late Bronze Age, because that's what the survey told us. And right beneath the surface, inches down, we struck architecture, and it turned out that the architecture we had was the most rich 2 squares in the entire area. We've dug now something like 25 more, 30 more since then, and we've never quite captured the goodness of that 1 square, because what happened is that was actually a small, probably cultic room that was part of this large building. It included a standing stone that was, we believe, in the shape of an anchor, which is really interesting because we have similar things like this at Ugarit, where in the temple of Baal, there are anchors that are standing stones there. It's meant to represent Baal's dominion, probably over the sea, because he wages war against Yam. We found massive storage jars known as pitoi that were imported from Cyprus. We found a number of other imports stacked inside of these pitoi, some of which were local, some of which were imported. We found unique votive vessel that had the oil still inside, and just a whole host of goodies. But look, you could probably find half of what we found in an antiquities shop, but those don't mean anything because they're just pretty. What gives them meaning is where you find them and what it means in that context. And so one of the things that has been really exciting, and I think one of the goals of our project, has been to follow this method, which is the archaeological process, but then to try and take new ways of analyzing this material, to look at the residue analysis of some of the vessels, to use what's called XRF, X-ray fluorescence, in the field to understand the chemical composition of not just an artifact, but how people were using the land and how that has changed the landscape, and all kinds of other methods that are really meant to be at the cutting edge of not only what archaeology can tell us, but to move the field forward, to ask new questions, develop new procedures. So I've just been really thrilled to be part of that process. I always like to say sometimes archaeologists are slow to pick up on new technologies, which is kind of dumb because our job is to study ancient technology. And so I think one of my favorite things about that has been utilizing new technologies, new research disciplines within the field. And we were able to do that in that building, and it continues. I mean, we discovered this in 2011, and every year it's like, well, there's another idea here. Let's pursue this. It's been a very rich find. There's others too. I mean, the Iron Age gate has been unbelievable to excavate. That was my ambition kept bugging Itzik. I said, the gate's here. We're going to find it. In fact, this could sound as bragging a little bit, so I want to be careful, but it'll never happen again. So I'll go ahead and tell the story. So the way that Burna is the site formation happened is it was a flat hill, natural hill, and in the early Bronze Age and the Middle Bronze Age, they were living in the center of the site, and down below it is the spring, the stream, which even photos from 1948, the local kibbutz, they show that the water was flowing through. But it was kind of a small tell. In the late Bronze Age, it really expands, and it was its largest and widest. And that's what we're studying this summer. So that's 1550 to 1200. Our site is in the latter part of that, from about 1300 to 1200. So the site's destroyed, and then they expand on top of that, and eventually build a fortification, a large casemate fortification, a double wall fortification that's very typical to sites from the period. A good example of this is the site of Beersheba, if anyone's ever been there before. But fortifications always need an opening. We call that a gate. And it's at the gate that we have lots of goodies, or at least that was the thought. Sometimes you have it. And it happens that as you walk around the top of the tell, you can almost walk on the entire length of the casemate wall or later iterations of the architecture that was on top of the casemate wall. Except there's this one stretch of about 50 yards or so where it dips and you lose it. And so we thought this is the gate. This is probably the gate because it's where it dips down. And I kept saying, Itzik, I want to dig. I love the Iron Age. Let me go to the Iron Age. And by the way, I missed the late Bronze Age now. But I want to dig in the Iron Age. So he said, okay, finally. And on the last day, I think it was of the 2017 season, we always do the drone shot, of everything. And this year had been a really dry winter, which means luckily the vegetation is much less. And so I with my hoe, this is the thing that you use to mainly dig with, a teria, we call it. I carved into the soil gate ? On the exact spot where I wanted to dig. And the next year it turned up being exactly in the center of the gate. It'll never happen again. I had a lot of clues, but it worked out so well that it literally where I wrote roughly this gate ? The entrance to the Iron Age gate was. And so after we dug
the drone footage pick up that picture? Could it see
it did
in the drone? Oh,
it
nice.
did. Yeah, it did. I made sure of that. And so, the gate has been really fun to work on. It wasn't as filled with goodies as I had hoped. And so it's been a real puzzle architecturally because all you're really digging is architecture, which I, already said, archaeologists love architecture, but we do like some finds. But it's clear that this was the main entrance, probably the only gate. It's possible there was another one, but this was the main gate, facing towards the south. And this last summer we found, I do have another nice find from there. We found evidence of an Assyrian arrowhead. And it was so cool because you're standing in this gate, you're in a tower, looking out to the Gouvrine Valley, and there's a little bit of ash, and then someone just pulls out this arrowhead. And I had just been in the Israel Museum and seen the difference between an Assyrian arrowhead and a local arrowhead. I go, that's an Assyrian arrowhead. That's what it is. And we cleaned it, and it's exactly what it was. And you're just like standing there, and you turn around, and you're looking at the same landscape that Isaiah is talking about, when the Rabshakeh, the cupbearer, comes from Jerusalem, from Hezekiah, and he's coming back to Sennacherib, and he's fighting against Libna. And it's just like, wow, like you are touching history. You're touching an arrow that was shot from an Assyrian soldier to the gate of Libna that apparently didn't find its mark and he didn't recover when the site was destroyed. And you're standing in that tower looking out at this valley. And, consider, maybe what I said before is that right after this. This is the story where the Assyrians leave off because of divine intervention. There's nothing like that in terms of archaeology. There's nothing like that where you be able to touch, feel, experience a very human and yet enchanted story. And that's what I think, part of my addiction to the world of the Bible is being able to continue to do that and learn more about it.
So when you say that the gate was a little material poor, I can't help but think, well, if it was a Levitical town, maybe they were just a less materialistic society. Maybe there was less trade happening at that gate, less, more just sustenance living. I don't know. But that is interesting. And
yeah,
maybe this season will answer some questions, at least about the period before it.
Right. So a lot of times when we think about the types of material that you find in archaeology, archaeologists, I always say, are sadistic. We love other people's destruction, especially if the people that were killed didn't have time to steal their goodies, take their goodies with them. That's the best, sorry for them, but good for us. But in those situations, it's often in a home or in a palace or even in a temple, whereas a gate is defined not by occupation. It's defined by a place that you're constantly moving in and out of. Now, you can have great discoveries, as was found recently at the other half of the gate at Lachish, which Yushishkin left for future generations when he excavated there, and was excavated recently by Sa'ar Ganor. And they found a toilet and a shaved off altars. This is the Aggies, shave the horns off. That was thought to be Hezekiah. Hezekiah and his cult reform, according to 2 Kings chapter 17, 2 Kings chapter 18, carried out this. So the hope was maybe there's something like this. And it's also near the gate at Beersheba, where the altar was disassembled and put into a storehouse. So there's potential to find symbols of religion or power at the gate. Now, that doesn't mean you won't find pottery. And we did. We found pottery, but it was really interesting. If you compare our finds to others, it was orders of magnitude less, and we're excavating more in terms of depth and exposing wider areas. It's just because what you're excavating is primarily stone and stone architecture, as opposed to floors and other brooms and that nature.
I know that in addition to the Tel Burna project, you have something very big on your plate for 2024 and 2025. So can you tell us, what is this movie that you're working on, and how can we see it?
I'll tell you what I can. What I can.
But you did already say that you're heading to Israel.
I did. So I work for a company called Gesher Media. I'm the director of research there, and I'm also been involved in creating a film called The Quest for the Throne of God. You can go to our website, geshermedia.com. You can actually see a teaser, not a trailer, a teaser of some of the stuff we've shot. The film is going to be a 90-minute or so theatrical release. That's our hope and our goal. It is a docudrama, meaning it's a documentary in nature, but we have dramatic elements. We have filmed some many nice scenes about the story of the Ark. It includes characters such as Moses and David, and who ends up surprisingly being one of the key figures, the prophet Jeremiah, who is the last person, according to the Bible, to mention the Ark. And he is the key figure in the legends of the lost Ark about what potentially happened to it. So it has several components. It has the dramatic element, which we filmed. It has scholar interviews with a whole host of scholars, including myself, Joshua Berman, excellent Israeli scholar who lives in Israel, Cindy Parker, May Young, and many others. So Scott Stripling, so it's got a number of scholars that are in it, and we're going to add some more while we're in Israel. And then what I'm going to be filming is a part of this quest, exploring the most ancient legends of the lost Ark. I mean, there are lots of, when you talk about the Ark of the Covenant, I've learned people don't know. If you just say the Ark, they'll say Noah's Ark. You can do that in Kentucky. I go, no, not that one. Although there is a relationship between Noah's Ark and the Ark, by the very fact that the name is the same. It's actually not in Hebrew. One is a Tebet and the other is Aaron. The Ark of the Covenant is the Aaron. They're not the same, but the Ark has this incredible story that is much more than just where it is. What it is and what it meant to ancient Israel, I think, is one of the greatest, largely untold and undiscovered stories in biblical studies. In fact, I would say, and I'm very cognizant of this, of 50%, I think I read the other day, 50% of American audiences believe things like ancient civilizations made by aliens, lost civilizations, right? These worlds of long dead ice ages from pseudoscientists and pseudo-archaeologists, propagated by ancient aliens on the History Channel and whatever else you like, and TikTok. So and the Ark is, of course, a part of that lore, all of which is complete nonsense, of course. But if you're trying to reach people with the story of the Ark and what it means, you often are running into people who have really bad preconceived ideas about what the Ark is and what it means, or at least they've been misinformed by people who are in it for power, prestige, wealth, and they're just essentially complete charlatans. So that also creates this domino effect where archaeologists, real scholars, don't want to talk about it because they'll see themselves as part of that, or they'll be saying, "Oh, it's just an Indiana Jones type thing." And yet, I believe, and this was a bit of a surprise to me, as I've studied over the last 3 or 4 years and continued to develop this, not only as a documentary with the team, Roy Brown of Gesher Media, and leading all of this, of course, but also writing a book on the subject, which I'm still in the process of, is I believe that the story of the Ark of the Covenant is really the incarnation of the Hebrew Bible. And for the Christians who are listening to this, what I mean is to compare the story of God taking on flesh in the form of what we celebrate at Advent and Christmas, of Jesus taking on flesh, is something that can be closely compared to, and I would even say directly linked together by the New Testament. The easiest place to see this is the Gospel of John 1:14. It says that the Word took on flesh and dwelled among us. The word there is tabernacled. He tabernacled among us. And if you look at the story of the Ark from its creation on Mount Sinai, and we're going to explore what that would have looked like in its Egyptian background. We even made an Ark, so we could actually discover our replica. And what it means throughout the whole story, I'd say there's nothing, no object, no character that is more central to the story of the Hebrew Bible than the Ark. Even so, it appears in 17 biblical books. It occurs at least across 700 years, and depending on if you're early date or late date. And comparatively, the Ark appears in 3 chapters in one book, the Ark of Noah. So the Ark of Noah appears 20 times. The Ark of the Covenant appears, if you're counting that, appears over 200 times. And even books after the Ark is lost are all about, well, what does this mean, right? And you're going through Ezekiel right now. What does Ezekiel 1 mean? What does Ezekiel 8 through 11 mean? Where he sees the real power that rested on the Ark leaving the Holy of Holies. What does it mean? Did it abandon the Ark? Was it brought out at that time? Well, that's part of the enigma. That's part of the mystery that Ezekiel and Jeremiah seem to be alluding to is something strange happened to it. Was it lost? Was it destroyed? Was it secretly hidden? And so what we're really attempting to do in Quest for the Throne of God is to tell that story, to tell the amazing story of the Ark, its birth, its middle career when it's in the wilderness and fighting against the Philistines, set up at Shiloh and so on, its retirement, which I think is Jerusalem, when it becomes like this well, I run the risk of losing people here, but it becomes this Palladium, Palladium, if you remember the story of Troy. How can Troy fall? Well, Odysseus has to go in and with Diomedes and steal the Palladium. That only if they take it out can Troy fall. Well, it's interesting. Jeremiah 7 talks about, you're trusting and saying the temple of the Lord, the temple of Yahweh, and it's never going to fall because we've withstood Sennacherib. We've withstood all these conquerors. Don't trust in it anymore because it's going away. And so I think that crisis moment of the temple's destruction, but also the silence that what happened to the footstool. Lamentations talks about how God forsook his footstool. Now that's another word for the Ark. The footstool of Yahweh, the throne of Yahweh. And so where we really are trying to tell that story, but we're telling it through the lens of the most ancient legends, the legends that all were written in the Second Temple period, that are reflecting on what does it mean for me as a Jew to have a temple that has no heart, to have a temple that lacks the throne of God, and not just lacks it, but there's so many predictions of a return. There's so many predictions that, like Zechariah 12, Zechariah 14, or Ezekiel, that clearly speak to God returning to his people. Malachi ends with the messenger of the covenant, Elijah before his face. So what do I do now with this in mind? And so our, and I gotta be careful here, our without giving too much away, our film explores those stories. And so what it really is trying to kind of do is to see the biblical story from the side, right? To look at the biblical story. And I think that's actually one of the most effective ways of thinking about the story. Is not that everyone knows the Old Testament, because I think people don't really, and that's what good podcasts like Bible Fiber are trying to do. But seeing it from the side, much like The Chosen has done, allows you to, oh, I didn't know that before. Oh, I didn't think of that before. And so that's what we're really trying to do through what we hope is a educational but also entertaining docudrama called Quest for the Throne of God, premiering in theaters, and Baruch Hashem, inshallah, in early sometime in 2025, probably in the earlier parts. That's the current goal.
Are you anticipating it'll be on theaters, or people are?
Yes, our goal is for theatrical release. Of course, it will be available through whatever distributors, whatever deals we make afterwards, which is in the works.
Where can people find? So what is the Instagram? I've been enjoying just all of the behind the scenes footage on Gesher's Instagram. What is it called?
Yeah, so our social media brand is called Behind the Bible. We have a place in virtually every social media related spot. So if you're a TikTok fan, a YouTube fan, a Instagram fan, as Shelley is, a Facebook fan, we've just also launched a Twitter account, which I'm having some fun with, and also a Substack, which we also just launched, that will engage with not just the film, that's clearly a big part, but also my goal and Gesher's goal is to do the same, entertain and educate people about the wider biblical world. And so you'll find there lots of Ark of the Covenant type stuff, but there will also be Jerusalem. There will also be New Testament stuff. And we have a podcast that's in development called Behind the Bible Podcast. So all of those are under the brand Behind the Bible. The easiest place to do so is to go to our website, geshermedia.com. You can, again, look us up on any of these websites as Behind the Bible to find what we're doing.
Well, Chris, we are going to be praying for the Tel Burna excavation project, eagerly awaiting news about the upcoming film. And so whenever it's ready to be released, we'll have you back on so you can reveal a little bit more about what to expect and how we can see it. But thank you so much for being on Bible Fiber.
My pleasure, Shelley. Anytime. Thanks for inviting me.
Shabbat Shalom, Am Israel Chai.